have a name. It is Nimbar. Hi, happy Sunday, everybody. Thank you to Kilopants, who's been here for 8 months. Bobo. Lizzie, who's been here for 20 whole months. And Warp John, Warpigeon, 23, been subbed up with Prime the other day. Thank you for that. Yeah, thank you very much for the big 9 months. What day is it? Wait, is it? Hang on. Australia's in the future. It's Monday there, right? But what time? It's like, is it the middle of the night over there, or is it like early in the morning? Very early. Okay. That's early, damn. For a while, I was using Tom Walker streams to try to encourage myself to get out of bed in the morning. Jimmy, thank you. 2 big months. Jimmy, Joe, this is DM material. This is material for the DMs. But Joe gifted me a copy of Dead by Daylight and said that you guys are gonna teach me how to play. So let's do that sometime. Gotcherman, thank you for the sub. I have a problematic amount of games right now. Playing Total War. And let's leave the screen. Hello. Wait, should I tweet that I'm streaming? Hang on. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm here now. That's how long it takes me to tweet these days. I need to start up my computer, which I turned off earlier today. I need to open my browser. I gotta get my two-factor in there. Gotchaman, thank you very much for those 41 months. Oh yeah, it takes me, I have a lot of nightmares these days about, or not nightmares, just like anxiety dreams about trying to use my damn phone, trying to type something into my phone, but my hands won't go fast enough, or I forgot how to do it. Or I just like can't find the app that I need. Shroomish, thank you very much for setting back up. Very nice lighting, but yeah, the sun's up still. You're gonna see more lighting coming in from this way in these brighter seasons. Very, very bright in the room. Hell yeah, Buttmaster. Hey, Morrigan. Bobo. Bobo isn't anything. His paddle quite. You know what? Yeah, the music's pretty loud. Hang on. Is that better? Sorry, I never turned down the music. I had the music fully cranked, fully torqued. Sleepy. I don't know why I'm sleepy already. I have a little sip of tea, and then we'll go over today's class. We're gonna do a little React Andy stream to start, and then we're gonna play a game, maybe. Yeah, we will play a game. 24-hour nap stream. Yes, please. You're not actually allowed to do that, I don't think. If you're the sole streamer on a stream, you're supposed to be like actively doing something. Didn't read the syllabus. Alright, here we go. Uh-oh, that's a sword. I'll be right back. There we go. I just got to quit out of Dropbox. I'm just trying to upload 70 gigs of files right now. That probably was making the stream a little bit choppier. What kind of sword is that? No idea. But we're gonna find out. So we're gonna watch a. I kind of. We'll see if we like this video. I've watched some videos from this guy before. This guy's Shad. He's a classical and medieval combat nerd guy who does YouTube videos. And he doesn't seem like a complete shithead. But we'll we're not going to try to vet him too hard. He is from New Zealand, so he's got a fun accent. But this video is called Medieval Misconceptions, Battlefield Tactics, Units, and Formations.
Shadiversity.
Shadiversity.
Greetings, I'm Shad, and it has become fairly evident that
So, First of all, bet this guy looks exactly the way you thought he was going to look. Second of all, this guy is actually featured on the channel, on my channel. You've heard his voice in the Magnum Kong sound drop when I was looking for a guy to substitute in for Sword in Danny DeVito's line from It's Always Sunny. This is the guy's voice, who it is.
I need to make a video on the basics of battlefield tactics because more recently there have been some
I dropped my monster
sword
that I used for my Magnum
Kong.
That's right. That's the exact one I was talking about. Thank you for that, Sin.
Atrocious examples that show many writers' lack of understanding or even the fundamentals of this subject. The two most egregious examples of recent memory is The Long Night from the last season of Game of Thrones and Mulan, the recent Disney remake of Mulan, and some of the things that are depicted on there in regards to how, you know, certain units operate, when to do what, and how things play out. It's just blindingly stupid, mentally deficient almost with how dumb things are.
George R.R. Martin doesn't base his battles, this is another true thing, doesn't base his battles in historical warfare. He bases them on football games. This is a confirmed thing that he has said himself, which might not be a bad idea for trying to get American audiences to understand and appreciate battles. No, seriously, Sin. He's like a huge New York Jets fan. So like he has their games like memorized in his head. He's like I think the Battle of the Bastards is based on a specific football game.
You can do this all online. All you need is a computer that can have because it's harder to break through. And if the infantry, then you also now, a basic breakup of unit type is fairly kind of understood. You have infantry, which are soldiers that use melee weapons on foot. You have ranged units, and so this could be bows or crossbows. And then you have cavalry, such as heavy cavalry and light cavalry. But it's a mistake to think that each one of these unit types can fall into a neat little box as to how well they perform against others. For instance, take infantry. What type of infantry? Okay, are they equipped with large shields so they can form up a shield wall, or are they equipped with large spears or pikes and they form a Schiltron type of formation as we saw the Scots do? And what I just said there is also a little bit too simplistic because you can have multiple different types of arrangements of weapons. You could have the first line of infantry with shields and the line directly behind them with long spears and pikes to double up the defensive and offensive value. But then you also have the arrangement of the specific unit itself. I've made some simple props to help demonstrate this point. You can have the infantry lined up in a longer line. This lets them cover a longer line on the battlefield, but it also can make their line thin. If you make the infantry formation thicker, this can be much more beneficial in helping defend against things like heavily cavalry charges because it's harder to break through. And if the infantry line is thinner, that might make it perfect target for a heavily cavalry charge to try and break through the line and break up the unit formation. So how deep and wide the formation is very significant because, again, if you make the formation deeper, well, suddenly you have less men on the front being able to do actual damage. And so are you utilizing your men to the most efficient way possible? Do you see how gloriously complex and sophisticated just simple things like how thick or wide you make your unit formation, how that can affect...
BB says, excuse me, Professor Chad, what about rat ogres? What color square are rat ogres? Rat ogres are just like, they're just bowling balls that you just throw at the little figurines.
Affect the entire flow of a battlefield, and battles have been won and lost by the smallest little decisions like this, like the unit formation itself. And then going back to the weapons, I was only describing 2 examples of, say, spears and shield walls, but you have other types of infantry units as well. And then on top of all this, you also have terrain, and that is a massively sophisticated and complex thing that can change the course of the battlefield as well. So I'm going to do my best to try and give an example of under what circumstances each unit type would have certain advantages, certain disadvantages, what things we can learn from the historical battlefield that will inform us as to exactly that, their strengths and weaknesses. But I also want to talk a little bit about battlefield tactics. And before we even get onto the battlefield, there is a very large component to medieval warfare that involves these unit types, but aren't necessarily in a battle, yet sometimes it is. And it's the idea of skirmishes.
That's right.
Now, a skirmish is a small type of engagement, but not a battle, where you have a detachment in your army doing something to stuff up the opponent. Baits, traps, ambushes, cutting supply lines. And this is a crucial component that is often overlooked in Hollywood battles and things like that, and it is supply. With any army, there is going to be a large attachment on wagons, pack horses, whatever, that is bringing food and supplies with them. And not only that, as the army is marching along, having a direct line of supply is very important, especially if the battle is going to be extended for a long period of time. You
got to make sure everybody's got their treats, everybody's got their go-gurts. Everybody's got their Game Boys and everyone needs batteries for their Game Boys, juice boxes, fruit gummies. Yes, we need all these things to do war properly. Grain, big bags of grain.
You need an unbroken line so supplies can keep coming in. And if that line is broken, suddenly things can get very, very serious. Skirmishes are also crucial in manipulating the position of the opposing army. If you can feint them, bait them, charge, intimidate, force them to move, you can try and force them into a very compromising position on the battlefield, because terrain plays a massive role in how effectively you will win or lose. The course of entire battles have been determined by the effectiveness of certain skirmishes. Another massively, crucially important element to the skirmishes is scouting. Knowing where the enemy is and being able to set yourself up in an advantageous position in the terrain in preparation. This is exactly what happened with the Battle of Hastings. Harold was able to find out what the Normans were doing and set himself up on a very advantageous position. He grabbed the high ground, and I'm actually going to go into a bit more detail about the Battle of Hastings because...
Get fucked, Normans. This is all cool. I wish I'm already like... I've been playing these Total War games for like 2 weeks, and I'm already like, oh, it would be cool if like scouting was like seeing exact enemy formations and stuff ahead of a battle was more possible. But then I guess the AI would be able to do that to you, and that would suck.
That is a great case example of how things can play out differently in the battle itself to get people to lose the advantage of terrain that they might have gained and lose completely. But because of the scouting, he was able to put himself in a very good position. And so knowledge is profoundly useful in the medieval battlefield as to where the enemy is, where they're going, and if you can intercept them or not. And this is usually all played out in the fine craft of skirmishes. But unfortunately, skirmishes are often overlooked completely in the depiction of medieval-like battlefields, because this applies to medieval fantasy just as much, by the way, and oftentimes people try and adapt it into medieval fantasy. All right, let's now move to unit type. And as I mentioned before, a basic breakdown is infantry, long-ranged, cavalry. Siege equipment is this odd thing I will come to. Now, the idea that...
Sounds like he's got some opinions about siege equipment. Hey! Ronnie She-Wolf, thank you for subbing up 10 whole months.
These function like a rock, paper, scissors similar to a video game, is incorrect. Archers aren't particularly strong against cavalry, which are then particularly strong against infantry, and infantry particularly strong against archers. And then their archers are weak against infantry, infantry weak against cavalry, and cavalry weak against... It doesn't work like that. Actually, very much depends on...
This is reminding me of... I want to see if we can find a story or a documentary about a particular attempted siege, or not siege, but invasion of New Zealand. That where the indigenous people there just completely sent them packing in an embarrassing fashion. It involved some really cool tactics and trickery. We'll look that up later.
On the type of units, as I mentioned before. For instance, an infantry unit that has very large shields and can form shield walls can protect themselves very well against long-ranged fire. But in reverse of that, if they're a type of pike formation, like a schiltron, or they're armed with spears and less ability to protect themselves,
spears are so long.
Now they're going to be fairly vulnerable to long-ranged fire. The utility of cavalry against both long-ranged units and infantry, again, very much depends. And in this instance, it can be dependent by terrain. We have seen very clearly in the battles of, say, Crécy and Agincourt, that bowmen were profoundly effective against cavalry, but that was very much due to terrain kind of circumstances and the type of approach that the heavy cavalry was taking. If the heavy cavalry was able to hit them on the sides or unawares, they would have wiped the floor with those archers. And it's also the type of cavalry as well. Heavy cavalry functions differently to light cavalry. Light cavalry is not made to...
Yeah, anti-boredom. They should just be making doom stacks. Just get 10 of the biggest guy, 20 of the biggest guy you can, and put them out there.
Break through unit formations, but rely on greater mobility to surround and harry any formation, and potentially bait them to get them to break apart and pursue. And as soon as the unit is broken apart and is not held together tightly, well, then the light cavalry can actually really, do some damage.
I don't know if he's gonna touch on this. One of the things that, like, in playing these like medieval warfare games I've been playing, that I've been wondering a lot about, is like morale and like the process of convincing this guy who you just trained how to use a sword 2 weeks ago that he should listen to you.
Mongolian light cavalry were able to destroy the Polish knights, and that was through many engagements. What the Mongolian light cavalry did was harass the Polish knights, get them to pursue them where they broke their lines, and as soon as they were broken up...
Yeah, hang on, let's back up and check out those horse strongs of the Polish getting absolutely wrecked by the Mongolians.
As soon as the unit is broken apart and is not held together tightly, well, then the light cavalry can actually really, do some damage. The Mongolian light cavalry...
Oh my God! Those, sorry, yeah, those are like clearly like little cutaways for the horses to look out, but it looks like the horses just got big ass googly eyes. Gatchaman, I think that would happen all the time. Like deserters were a thing. Just people with military equipment and training just running around the countryside.
Were able to destroy the Polish knights, and that was through many engagements. What the Mongolian light cavalry did was harass the Polish knights, get them to pursue them where they broke their lines, and as soon as they were broken up, the light cavalry was able to come in and destroy them. But if they were to, say, use their light cavalry as, say, heavy cavalry and just charge headlong into these units, they would have been destroyed, okay? And so it's not that cavalry has a universal advantage against infantry or vice versa or anything like that.
Zabzi, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to stream Warhammer until I get a better PC. It puts my CPU up to like 100%. and it gets chuggy. Hey, Sylph, we're learning about battlefield tactics.
Like that, it's very much the types of units that affect how well they will do. And even though one might have an inherent advantage based on certain setups,
we got a horse
doesn't mean
down.
They will win, because terrain and how they're utilized is, again, crucially important. The next thing that I want to address in the classic kind of unit types of a medieval battlefield is the thing I've referred to a couple of times right here. The notion of employing siege-type weaponry in a battlefield. Stop doing it, Hollywood. Like, serious.
Here we go. Here's the T that was teased earlier when he held up that siege equipment and went...
Like, it's not to say it was never done. In some circumstances, it was done. For instance, in the Battle of Crécy, they actually had some very early types of cannons that they were being used. But I have yet to find a single historical battlefield, maybe you guys know of any particular ones, where a trebuchet was used on a medieval battlefield. To my knowledge, never happened. Why? Because a trebuchet is not a mobile weapon, okay? An army needs to be mobile to pursue the enemy or to flee from an enemy, to find the right terrain advantage and get ready for battle really quickly. If they're lugging around a really big, heavy trebuchet, it's going to slow them down. Now, of course, they did carry siege weapons with them for sieges, but to take the time to set them up, okay, they weren't, taken with them ready to go, okay, especially trebuchets. Mangonels, slightly different, but by the way, mangonels were also rarely used in medieval times. Please watch my video on catapults and big things people get wrong with them. But something like this is more of an anachronism than an actual representation of medieval siege weaponry, okay? Catapult is actually more of an umbrella term that refers to anything that throws rocks, and can more often is referring to a trebuchet in the medieval context than an actual...
I can throw rocks, Shad. Am I a catapult?
Catapult mangonel thing. They were much smaller, and yes, they could be used in the battlefield, but rarely ever actually used. Their primary massive utility is when you have an opponent that isn't moving, a stationary thing, because when it's difficult to line up a shot, okay? And so oftentimes you need test fires to get the range right, and all the enemy has to do is move, and you've lost all that time in calibrating.
This is my favorite part of Total War so far, is when I was doing my Skaven sieges, and you can just roll your plague catapults up to range with their wall and just start, like, you can just throw shit at them and they can't do anything because they need to stay on the wall. It's their job to be on the wall. So you're just like, okay, just boink.
Thing in the range and trajectory and all that stuff, and you got to start again. And so using a trebuchet on a battlefield against a mobile enemy that can just move out of the way is profoundly dumb. But we often see it in Hollywood depictions of medieval-like battlefields, and those examples that I mentioned, both of them have that. The Long Night in Game of Thrones and Mulan, the most stupid, mentally deficient uses of a trebuchet we've ever seen. And I mean,
it's a wuxia film.
They actually set up the trebuchet outside the castle. Because, all right, if you're defending a castle, having a trebuchet on the inside could be very beneficial.
So in Mulan, they put the trebuchet outside of the castle to defend it. Faith says, this is my kind of niche rant. Hey, Faith. Wait, I know you studied a lot of medieval art. Did you also, study this stuff?
Official, not necessarily against the mobile enemy that can just move out of the way once you line up the shot, but to take out the attacking siege weapon. If they have a trebuchet that's going to hit your castle, having one to take that out, kind of useful. And you'll probably keep it inside the castle, not vulnerable on the open field. And
yeah, that is a little silly, but it's a movie.
Use it against mobile infantry, like, my goodness. But for the most part, you can simply exclude this and you'll have a much more accurate depiction of a medieval battlefield. The next part is deployment and terrain. This is a hugely significant component to a medieval battlefield because it can be utilized in such a way that can nullify an enemy's advantage based on the unit types that they're employing. Also, the terrain is going to affect the deployment of your units, whether they can be spread out in a longer line or they have to be clumped up. So let me demonstrate a couple of examples of unit arrangement, their deployment. And if you'll notice here, the color coding I'm going is red is infantry, white is ranged, and yellow is cavalry. So you can kind of understand what I'm doing with these Lego props. First of all, why put men into unit formations like this? Well, you don't need to think too hard to figure out the massive advantages. If you have two opposing sides of, say, 5 soldiers each, and one side has their soldiers spread apart and one side has them clumped together in a unit.
This art rocks. I don't see any way where the strategy on the right here could lose. This seems like the winner to me. Right? This is a zone defense, because each of these guys is going to have to, like, run over to one of these guys to attack them. Like, these guys, they just keep standing here like this, and these guys are like, oh, what are they doing? Exactly. Each one of them can flank a guy.
The unit can essentially focus in on one of the opposing soldiers at a time, essentially turning the battle into 5 rounds of 5 versus 1. And of course, one soldier has far less a chance to fight off 5 soldiers at once. Unit formations simply allow a side to maximize the advantage of their numbers, especially if they're in a position where they can send all their numbers together against separated groups of their opponents, which essentially turns what should have been an even battle, the same numbers against the same numbers, into something that greatly favors one side because they're fighting the opposing side in smaller successive groups. The next part is a matter of protecting your vulnerable sides. As an individual, you can only really protect your front, or protect your front most effectively. If you have a guy to your side with another shield, you suddenly don't have to worry too much about your shield, or even your back if you have people on the back end protecting it as well. The other advantage is more weapons facing the enemy. By having several lines of, say, infantry, the second line can actually still strike past the first line to hit the enemy. But what about if you have a thicker formation like so? Advantages and disadvantages. You have less men on the front lines being able to attack the opponents, but the advantage is if anyone gets injured on the front line, they can move back and be replaced by people who are in the rear who are uninjured and more fresh. This is actually one of the big tactics that the Romans used. They would actually cycle out the front line of men down the back, and the next lines would move up, and they would do this in a successive order to keep the front line always fresh and ready to attack and fight. But this only works particularly effective if you have multiple lines. This limits the range or distance that you can affect on the battlefield with how many men you have at the front. And so there are pros and cons, but overall there are huge advantages and some disadvantages depending on the formation that you pick with your unit types, particularly if you look at archers. An archer unit could have multiple lines if they're shooting in volleys, and as to how often did they shoot in volleys versus more point-blank straight, from looking at medieval battles, it seems to be...
I hope that the way that they found out this element of it, whether the archers were firing straight or in volleys, was they just went around, they dug up medieval battlefields and just found people with arrows stuck in the top of their heads. Just like straight up and down. Beep.
Bit of both, okay? Depending on circumstances, they shot in longer volleys as far as they could. I mean, there is a quote from Henry VIII, but that is a bit after the medieval period, that the standard bowman in the battle was expected to be able to shoot an arrow at 200 paces. That's about 180 meters.
Well, I mean, depends on how big you guys are.
So just to shoot at that range with a, heavy war arrow, it needs to be at least 70 pounds. 100 pounds have a much greater chance of reaching it. I've done some tests myself and found it can be difficult to actually reach that range at times. But if you're going to be shooting at a much more shallow trajectory at closer range, this type of formation isn't going to be beneficial because the archers behind the ones in front it would be difficult to shoot in between them. So having a formation like this, where there's a much longer line of archers that can shoot, very clearly, see who they're aiming for very clearly, is more beneficial, but that also makes a weaker line, and cavalry units could come in and break him apart very easily if they can close the distance without getting shot to pieces. And so in many instances, these unit types are actually mixed and matched a little bit depending on circumstances. For instance, in the Battle of Crécy, they had a unit of infantry at the centre, flanked by 2 units of archers. This made it so that any approaching enemy unit, whether it was cavalry or infantry, could be intercepted by the infantry that were with the archers, and the archers were there that they could perhaps try and flank and hit the enemy on the sides, or back them up, or just simply be protected by the infantry that was with them. So when you're picking the types of deployment for your men, it is also affected by the terrain. If you have any type of height advantage, like on a hill, it's very advantageous to put archers atop that hill, depending on how broad the hill is. If it's particularly wide, you might be able to get away with a longer line of archers attacking the downhill slope to where the enemy is. If you have a unit of infantry or cavalry, it might be good to keep them in reserve to come in and intercept any enemy infantry or cavalry that are approaching. The advantage of being up on a hill, whether that's with archers or infantry, is that it slows the
Faith
approach
says,
of the enemy.
hang on. Big fucking flex from Faith Schaefer in the chat. Says, I feel like this is common sense. You think people should just know this? Fucking Sun Tzu over here. Oh, okay. I see what you're saying, Faith, that you could fit more people on a bigger hill. I thought you meant in general medieval combat tactics was a thing that was just common sense.
Especially if they're using cavalry. We actually saw this in the Battle of Hastings. Harold actually didn't have many archers with him at all, but the attacking Normans, they did. They had not only archers, they also had cavalry, and they had infantry. What's really interesting about the Battle of Hastings is that because of the terrain and the type of infantry unit that was being deployed, they were actually able to nullify at first the effectiveness of both.
Sun Tzu was just like the original Instagram hustle guy. Like I'm sure he was really good at doing wars or whatever, but like it was a lot of it was a lot of like stuff about keeping your circle small, disappearing for 6 months and coming back with a business. He was a war influencer, that's right.
William the Conqueror's archers and his cavalry. Harold's infantry was mostly equipped with the classic shield walls and any types of weapons, whether it was spears, axes, swords. Kind of mixed swords were, of course, less common during that time. And so William led with a barrage of arrow fire, but because they had shields, they were able to defend against the arrow fire quite effectively until basically the arrow fire stopped. And then when the cavalry came in, all we know is that William's cavalry at first was not able to break apart Harold's infantry. And we don't know what exactly was the deployment. Did they have a thicker line that meant if the cavalry hit in, they would be just mired in a sea of enemy weapons and just get destroyed? Or that the shield was able to fend it off? But I think the terrain played a very big role, because going uphill will stall the speed and impact of a cavalry charge quite significantly. So with the bowmen and the cavalry proving to be mostly ineffective, William sent in his infantry to engage Harold's infantry up on the hill. And that lasted for quite a while until something really interesting happened. We don't know if this was a feint or a legitimate routing, but William's infantry line started to break and retreat down the hill. Harold's men took heart and then started to pursue them, charging down and away from their advantageous position. We even think this was against William's express orders, this breaking of formation and this pursuing. And as soon as they broke formation,
you gotta click defender mode on those
units. Guess who could come in and hit them with all the strength that they could muster? The heavy cavalry, because the unit broke apart and lost the advantage of the high ground. So the meme about high ground being advantageous from Star Wars doesn't apply in single one-on-one combat nearly as much as it does for the battlefield. And then William's cavalry was able to come in and just wipe the floor with Harold's infantry, and the Battle of Hastings was won by William the Conqueror. So it wasn't that heavy cavalry in this instance was just universally better than the infantry of the time. It was affected by the deployment of the men and the terrain that they had. Additional reasons that give significant advantage to having the high ground is that it gives you a better field of view to see the enemy.
If I had exposed my flank to an enemy, I would simply turn to face them.
And their numbers, where they're coming from, where they might retreat, if there's any units breaking off to try and flank your position. And I did mention it can give your archers additional range, but it can also hide additional troops you have behind the hill's horizon. It can mask redeployments or units you have moving to flank your opponent. Going uphill means it takes longer for the enemy to reach you, which means more time for you to shoot volleys of arrows at them. They have to exert more energy to reach you. It of course slows charges, I mentioned that one already, but it also gives you the advantage to push the enemy back because...
this is making me want to get back into Mount and Blade. This is from Mount and Blade, Lance. We sort of soft walked away from Mount and Blade when we lost everything, but maybe we can go back there and do a revenge quest on the guy who ruined our butter empire.
They have to actively fight against gravity from falling downhill. The next massive and kind of obvious component about the deployment of men are numbers. Yes, generally speaking, the larger army has the advantage, but we've seen countless times in both medieval and even classical periods that an outnumbered force can still wipe the floor if they use the right tactics. This happened in Crécy, Agincourt, Bannockburn, but we need to understand it was the specific tactics that were employed that actually won the day for the outnumbered force. All things being equal, the side with larger numbers will usually win, but it's not just tactics and maneuvering on the battlefield, even though that plays a massive part. It's like I mentioned, terrain also plays a massive part, but terrain advantage doesn't just come in having a high position, it's also affected by lines of retreat, whether that's going up or downhill, having to cross a river, being surrounded by marshland. All those things that I just mentioned have been employed on the medieval battlefield to the advantage and disadvantage of opposing sides. In the Battle of Bannockburn, Robert the Bruce employed marshy swampland as well as river waterways to stall charges, to block the lines of retreat, and to funnel an enemy almost into...
It's funny if you pretend that those are the names of two guys who he hired.
Battle of Bannockburn, Robert the Bruce employed marshy swampland as well as river waterways to stall charges.
I'm marshy swampland. I'm here to serve you, Lord.
To block the lines of retreat and to funnel an enemy almost into a kill zone position with very difficult retreat. Marshy ground was also used in Agincourt to stall a cavalry charge, because the weather plays a massive role in the battlefield as well, not just with how the battlefield plays out, if it rains the, night before, making the ground soggy, but also how long a certain battle can play out. It's very difficult to fight during the winter and having to deal with snow, especially if you're going on campaign into an opposing country where you don't have a secure line of supplies. This is why sometimes it's more advantageous to fortify in a castle or a city that is well defended with, fortress-type fortifications, instead of meeting an enemy on a pitched battlefield and relying on the weather, and also sicknesses that often creep into an army when they're on march and stuff like dysentery. It's a horrible thing that actually befell many medieval armies, and just relying on these natural things to help take out the enemy for them. The other thing that often encourages people to hunker down is it gives...
What I'm getting from that is you could probably win a lot of battles through the tactical deployment of diarrhea. And I'm sure that people have done that. I'm sure that people have intentionally tried to give their opponents diarrhea.
Gives them time for relief for other people, your allies, to raise larger forces and to come in. Generally speaking, the attacking force is always...
Cicada says Nurgle has joined the chat.
limited by time, and the longer things play out, the more advantage goes to the people they're attacking, because they only have a certain number of supplies, and the defenders, this is their land, okay? They are in a position to raise up more troops to defend themselves.
Now, a question, I've heard the thing about sieges throwing dead animals into enemy territory, or into like enemy fortresses and stuff and castles. Was that a biowarfare thing, or was that a morale thing? If it even happened. Because it doesn't seem like they would have known that was a thing that caused illness back then. Right? Like, they thought that the smell... I guess they would think this is a stinky dead cow. You would think they would know that shit causes illness. But they didn't. They had a lot of wrong ideas. It was both. It was a real thing that they did. And they did know that sickness, okay, came from the dead. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Death and sickness, right? Okay, yeah, I guess so. They believed it was my asthma. Jimmy, if you told me that the Great Stink of 1858 was a real thing, I'd believe you.
Last thing I want to talk about is the idea of retreat and how deadly battlefields actually were. And the answer might surprise you. A medieval battlefield wasn't as deadly as in comparison to, say, a modern battlefield.
Kieran Harris, thank you for
the
subbing back up.
likelihood of survival was much greater, but it balances out when you look at medical technology. If you get a cut and then infection, you'll probably die, whereas it's much more survivable, that type of injury, it's much more survivable in the modern day.
But there wasn't artillery where you might get suddenly shelled without warning. Even poor soldiers could wear armour that was effective against most of the weapons of their day, making the medieval battlefield far more survivable for the average soldier in comparison to modern warfare, where one bullet could kill you instantly over a very long distance. Then there's the fact that most battles didn't fight to the last man standing, but rather ended in routs, retreats, and surrenders.
Because if you retreat, you can live to fight another day. And you have to understand how this kind of works. You see, every individual soldier doesn't know what's happening in other parts of the battle, and so you could have multiple units of infantry engaging, and this unit here starts to get the real heavy brunt and starts to be
Back before the internet, we had armor. This is how people used to fight, and it proves very useful to the user. From a whole sword, it keeps you safe.
That's a great point, Rose. Why was anybody scared? They had armor.
Winning, well, guess what? This unit can then start to attack the remaining two, and the battle can be won, even though the entire battle was going the other way. It is amazing how many battles actually were determined by one side refusing to break lines in comparison to actually the number of men being lost. This is why that idea of the heroic, rousing of the men, even when they're getting, defeated and hammered, and suddenly one side takes heart. Say the attacking side, their leader gets killed, shot, okay? And suddenly the morale starts to be shaken on the side that's actually winning, and the losing side takes heart and just hammers them really quickly. They could still have only inflicted an additional 10% casualties and technically still be vastly outnumbered, but because they killed so many so quickly, that can actually ruin the morale of the side and get them to break and flee. And as soon as they break their unit formations, well, now they are vulnerable to the pursuing side. But the pursuing side can generally only pursue so far. The retreating enemy might find better terrain and actually reform up, and the pursuing side, because they were outnumbered, could then be wiped out. And so pressing your advantage too far could see you defeated, which is exactly what we saw in the Battle of Hastings. But retreat and surrender was far more common than fighting to the last man. And you also have to understand this, that the attacking side, they don't necessarily want to wipe out the opposing army completely. If they surrender, well, guess what? They can ransom off the people of the surrendered and get money from it as well. And trying to kill everyone to the last man means their own people are going to be put at risk, and even though you're able to wipe the opposing side out, you're still going to lose men, all right? Here's a phenomenal, realization, okay? People, they don't like to die. Shocking, I know. And as a result, the medieval battlefield, and really any battlefield, plays out in interesting ways as a result. The idea of routing and retreating is exactly a manifestation of that. If one side, even if they're not really losing, but especially if they are losing,
I'd love to see a source on that.
Die.
People
and
like
so
to die.
The way to survive that is to retreat. And it's also a misconception that wars and battles play out in these large single engagements. Oftentimes there are many engagements that happen over multiple days. Sometimes they engage with a clear victor on one side, but they haven't wiped out the opposing side by any measure. For instance, in the Battle of Bannockburn, Robert the Bruce gained a decisive victory on the first day, but the English still outnumbered them 2-1. So they weren't going to just pack up and leave. They still thought it was in the bag. And Robert the Bruce was actually in a very vulnerable position. He was considering retreating back to the fortifications that they had to hunker down. And then something happened, which is one of those really interesting things that can shift the entire course of the battlefield. One of the English knights defected, moving across to the Scottish to let them know that the English were demoralised. And he felt if the Scots rallied and really pushed forward, they could still win the victory, even though they were outnumbered 2-1. So in the following day, that's exactly what they did. And
that rules. Becoming Scottish.
And the Scottish did win. If this Englishman hadn't defected and didn't let them know that the English were demoralised, Robert the Bruce might have retreated and he could have lost the war as a result. And so it's amazing. I find it so interesting that the course of entire battles can be shifted on such small little things like that. If one side chooses to retreat too early or one side pursues, which puts them in a vulnerable position. If an enemy soldier defects, giving key, crucial tactical information, which allows another side, the defending attackers or whatever, to know the deployment where they could set up archers to ambush, cavalry to break apart things. It's amazing. All these things play a very dynamic way that should make battlefields depicted on screen or in role-playing games hugely fun. But instead, more often than not, we see the most baffling, stupid things happen on TV.
It's a movie. It's a movie. Shadowversity. Medieval castle sieges in
Ratings,
depth.
I'm Shad.
Oh, different look here. He's not wearing the tabard or whatever it's called. Or Oh, Garfield, that's funny. A friend of mine has Scottish family, and there's like some ancient Scottish drama with them where they were also raiders. So they have a family, like a family crest and stuff, but it's not recognized by any of the other clans because they were bastards and everybody hated them. Oh, now I don't remember exactly how I found this. Well, no, I know how I found this. I opened YouTube today, and YouTube was like, you should watch this.
Hi guys, real life Peter Griffin here. You know what really grinds my gears? The freaking winter. I mean, I hate this time of year. It physically hurts to be outside. And I love hanging out outside. You know, people want to complain about the heat, but at least you don't have to shovel heat. It's the worst time of year. You don't believe me? Let's go outside. A day like this is like a beautiful person with no personality. I mean, they look good in pictures, but who the hell wants to live with it? And the worst part is, whenever it's time to shovel, I can never find any of my family members, so I have to do it myself. Damn it, Meg, this is all your fault.
That's enough of that. Socks. Maybe I'll watch that one off stream before I watch it live in front of the internet. His racism video. Yeah, does he say that racism grinds his gears? Because that would be nice of him.
Do it myself. Damn it, Meg, this is all your fault.
Yeah, this guy. The thing about this guy is he looks exactly like Peter Griffin. Let me look up I'm gonna watch there's a new Elden Ring video that came out yesterday that I want to watch. So, like, hey, Dropkick, what's up? Elden Ring spoilers. If you're avoiding Elden Ring pre-release coverage, I just want to watch this, and then we're gonna play a game.
16.
No Pit Boys? We could do some Pit Boys, Faith.
Elden Ring is an action RPG set in a dark fantasy world.
Alright, we've seen these ogres before. Nothing new there. That's right. They're announcing football mode, Garrulous.
Enter the lands between. A place of boundless scale and untold.
Zabzi, somebody earlier was saying that, I think his Buttmaster in the chat said that, ogre, yeah. Or maybe it was you. I don't know. I haven't played them enough yet, but I think it's accurate that they worship meat.
Told mystery.
Oh, fuck. I love the fucking castle with a little bell truck nut.
Where your journey to reveal the fabled Elden Ring unfolds.
Thou shouldst take the crown.
The lands between is ruled by great heroes. Those who have inherited the blood of Queen Marika the Eternal.
Someone must extinguish thy flame.
You play as a descendant of the Tarnished. A group of heroes once banished from the lands between. When the Elden Ring was shattered, the very source of the Erd Tree's blessing was disrupted.
This is still a bunch of fantasy nonsense, but it's really funny to see that this is the most cogent somebody has ever spoken about Elden Ring lore in official or FromSoft lore in like an official FromSoft video. Like it's fairly insubstantial, but it's still like, oh, I'm not used to somebody like explaining the lore of one of these stories and they don't sound like they're on like 7 Xanax.
And eventually the exiled Tarnished found themselves being led once more by long-lost grace.
I offer you an accord.
As a Tarnished, you'll set off on a journey to the lands between, rich with mystery and fraught with danger. To face the former heroes.
Oh man, that looks so cool. Hang on, I'm gonna watch this all the way through before I start pausing it on shit.
The lands between comprises massive, dense play spaces, teeming with threats.
I love massive, dense play spaces.
You'll face many fearsome
skeletons.
Meet a wide variety of characters.
Yes, dude. Yes.
And discover hidden dungeons. Those who brave these catacombs, mines and caves.
I'm always surprised. Sorry, I said I wasn't going to keep pausing. I'm always surprised when people pronounce catacombs. Catacombs. I know that's the way you spell it, but
will find themselves adequately rewarded.
Treat received.
Travel far enough, and you'll eventually reach a legacy dungeon. A complex and intricately built dungeon map that connects seamlessly with the surrounding landscape. These sprawling environments.
Oh, a bird what got swords in its hands.
Creating a different feel from that of your journey through the overworld. The lands between are vast and offer a high level of freedom for explorers. Use the map to assist with navigation. Place beacons and markers for places
Metal
that
Gear
catch
Solid
your eye.
5.
Or fast travel
Smoking
to
a
previously
fucking
discovered
phantom doobie
checkpoints.
in the lands in between.
For faster traversal, summon Torrent, your trusty spectral steed, at any time, anywhere outside of dungeon
Pokemon
areas.
did it first.
Torrent offers excellent mobility, making it possible to venture further and higher into the lands between. Throughout your journey, you'll meet with many characters, each with their own motives and goals.
I am the lord of all that is.
I love gold!
Help them pursue these goals to reveal.
Hang on, Soup, let me grab this video link. This came out yesterday.
Their backstories and learn of your shared place in this world. Player freedom extends far beyond exploring the lands between. Your character can
oh
be
my god, yes.
From appearance to armor and ability. Become a warrior, specializing in close quarters combat. A caster that excels at sorcery or incantations. Or of course, you could attempt to master a little of everything. An extensive lineup of equipment, weapons, magic and skills are waiting to be discovered, allowing you to develop your character in whatever way you wish. A keen adventurer may find item crafting useful, using materials picked up along the way. Many different items can be crafted on the fly, from arrows and firebombs to cured meats and other consumables that offer a range of benefits. The player may call upon spirits to fight alongside.
Soup, it really depends on the game. In some games, it's just incredibly overpowered. Like in the first Souls, Dark Souls, certain magic builds are really, really, really strong. Oh yeah, here's that hand thing again. In my experience, like I did one of the easy mode magic builds that somebody set me up with, and it was really cool. But it was also sort of, I don't know, it didn't feel as well tuned and entertaining as the rest of the combat because it was just sort of kiting and blasting.
Spirits vary in type and behavior, so summoning them according to the situation is key. In particularly dangerous situations, you may choose not to engage the enemy, using stealth to outflank or escape. You can also join with players from other worlds to journey, explore, and challenge tenacious foes together.
I'm so excited to fucking run around with my homies.
The expansive world of the lands between is abound with danger, intrigue, and mythological drama.
God, the monster designs are still hitting.
Begin your adventure and reveal its secrets for yourself. Rise, Tarnished. Rise and become the Elden Lord.
Yeah, Lexi, I'm just going to be dropping through on that Fanbyte thing on Friday. I don't know, I'm probably just going to be on there for a little while. I'm not going to be playing, though. I don't have the game. I mean, I will have it on Friday. I will be buying it. And I don't know, chat, should I try to get this physically? If I'm not getting a... I've been sort of, my default has sort of become playing, just getting games digitally. And I'm like, what if I were to get a disc? Because then there's even the slight possibility that it arrives early. I do have a disk drive, yeah. So here's the stupid thing, Cicada, these days on PS5. You put the disc and it just installs, and then it downloads a huge batch. What's this Geralt thumbnail? I'll help for a price.
Peggy 16.
Peggy. Alright, so we fully got fucking samurai armor in this one. Look at that. Oh, yes.
Elden Ring is an action RPG set in a dark fantasy world. Enter the lands between, a place of boundless scale and untold mystery, where your journey to reveal the fabled Elden Ring unfolds.
Hey, Meme Chart. Yeah, we're gonna watch this and then we're gonna play some games.
Thou shouldst take the crown.
Thou shouldst.
The lands between is ruled by great heroes.
Many goblins. I think Miyazaki has confirmed we got 2 swamps. We're looking at a dual swamp situation.
Extinguish thy flame.
You play.
Memestar says, watched your video, and I gotta say, choice use of the Lego Yoda death sound. Thank you. I'm gonna try to get that into more videos from now on. For reference, Lego Yoda scream.
Play as a descendant of the Tarnished, a group of heroes once banished from the lands between. When the Elden Ring was shattered, the very source of the Erd Tree's blessing was disrupted, and eventually the exiled Tarnished found themselves being led once more by long-lost Grace.
Hi, I'm Long Lost Grace. That's her. This is Long Lost Grace right here.
As a Tarnished, you'll set off on a journey to the lands between, rich with mystery and fraught with danger, to face the former heroes of this world.
Oh yeah, I wanted to get a gander at them former heroes.
Off on a journey to the lands between, rich with mystery and fraught with danger.
All right, guy got a big thing on his head.
To face the former.
Yes. You got worms for a face, but you're all wrapped up in lace.
Heroes of this world. The lands between comprises massive dense play spaces, teeming with threats and brimming with the unknown. You'll face many fierce.
I love it when shit is brimming. Also, skeleton. No!
Fearsome enemies. Meet a wide variety of characters. And discover hidden dungeons.
That's just fucking Slave Knight Gale. That is fully Gale. Right?
Discover hidden dungeons. Those who brave these catacombs, mines and caves, will find themselves adequately rewarded.
Yeah, it's his cousin, Slave Knight Dale.
Travel far enough, and you'll eventually reach a legacy dungeon. A complex and intricately built dungeon map that connects seamlessly with the surrounding landscape.
Alright, here's Knifebird. Yes. Chief. Boss. Guy. The bird got knives on its feet and its head? Yeah, I think the bird also has a sword for a head. Trying to determine if those are grafted on to its little feet or if he's holding the knives. Okay, no, it's just a bird. I think that's like a horn on the bird. It's also got some arrows stuck in it, which are sort of messing with the profile, but I believe that's a bird. I can see the beak there, and it's got like a horn, and it's got, I think it's just holding knives. I think it's just holding swords. God, what a good shit.
Offer their own style.
I'm gonna have to keep an eye out for when they put the Elden Ring art book out there. I have the art books for Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3.
Of tension and exploration, creating a different feel from that of your journey through the overworld. The lands between are vast and offer a high level of freedom for explorers. Use the map to assist with navigation. Place beacons and markers for places that catch your eye. Or fast travel to previously discovered checkpoints. For faster traversal, summon Torrent, your trusty spectral steed, at any time, anywhere outside of dungeon areas. Torrent offers excellent mobility, making it possible to venture further and higher into the lands between. Throughout your journey,
oh, that's a little guy.
Characters,
that's Guts.
Each with their own motives and goals.
I am the Lord of all that is golden.
That's Gold member.
Help them pursue these goals, to reveal their backstories and learn of your shared place in this.
Oh, hang the frig on. Yes, we have our guy. I think this is our gray rat, and he's a literal rat this time. Going rat mode.
Learn of your shared place in this world.
Me when I am thinking. This lady looks awesome.
Player freedom extends.
Uh-oh, we got a sexy guy.
Far beyond exploring the lands between. Your character can be fully customized, from appearance to armor and ability. Become a warrior, specializing in close quarters combat. A caster that excels at sorcery or incantations. Or of course, you could attempt to master a little of everything. An extensive lineup of equipment, weapons, magic and skills are waiting to be discovered. Allowing
I think they're also, I'm like 90% sure they're using the same animation rig on this bear as they did for the big monkey. The big monkey that you fight in
you to develop
Sekiro.
Your character in whatever way you wish.
They just stretched a bear costume over a monkey body. Yeah, Brushy, I'm thinking about it. I definitely think I am going to probably play it off. Definitely, probably, for sure. No, I will be probably playing it off stream before I play it on stream, just so I can experience it at my own leisure, on my own couch. And then I'll play it in front of you. Or maybe I'll do what I did with Dark Souls 1 and do it simultaneously. Where I had the save that I was playing off stream, and then I had a separate save file for the stream, but I was always ahead in my off stream one. We'll see.
A keen adventurer may find item crafting useful, using materials.
Yeah, Grizzy, what it really comes down to is whether not when the game is out. Like, so I'm going to continue streaming when the game is out, and there is a possibility that even when I'm streaming, it's all that I'm gonna. It's like I'm just gonna want to be playing Elden Ring. So in that case, I will stream it. If not, it'll be once I've finished my own playthrough.
picked up along the way.
Hell yeah, Slug. I love pizza rolls.
Many different items can be crafted on the fly, from arrows and firebombs to cured meats and other
cured meat, yes please.
That offer a range of benefits.
Yeah, too many fingers on that hand.
The player may call upon spirits to fight alongside them.
Spirits.
Spirits vary in type and behavior, so summoning them according to the situation is key. In particularly dangerous situations, you may choose not to engage the enemy.
Little monkey man, I love these guys.
Or escape.
Beastmen.
You can also join with players from other worlds to journey, explore, and challenge tenacious foes together. The expansive world of the lands between is abound with danger, intrigue, and mythological drama.
That guy's really cool.
Begin your adventure and reveal its secrets for yourself. Rise, Tarnished.
Oh wow, I just now realized that the hand monster is actually 2 crossed hands. I guess. That's cool.
The expansive world of the lands between is abound with danger, intrigue, and mythological drama. Begin your adventure and reveal its secrets for yourself. Rise, Tarnished.
Yeah, that's just Master Hand and Crazy Hand.
Rise and become the Elden Lord.
That looks really fun.
Peggy 6.
Peggy. That is on Steam, yeah. It'll be on Steam next week, I mean. Friday. Oh, Amber Aaron, thank you for subbing back up. Alright, well, Faith, are you still here? You on Pit Boy? Okay. Let me get a barbecue Pit Boy. They live streamed 1 hour ago. I'm not gonna we're not gonna watch that quite yet. All right.
Gonna smoke me a fat brisket. I got my barbecue shoes on. I got my natural case. I got the hogs on the Welcome to BarbecuePitBoys.com. Today we're cooking up an all-meat sausage pizza at the pit, and it's real easy to do.
I'm already seeing 5 or 6 things on this table that aren't meat.
Here we have some mozzarella cheese. Here we've got some basil. Oh, we got some mushrooms. You're going to need some tomatoes for this recipe, some onion. You're going to need some pepperoni. Maybe not. It's optional. It's up to you. All right. Now, let's put everything together. So we're going to cut up our mozzarella cheese, and for a good, authentic sausage pizza, you got to have the mozz, right? So this is easy to do. Thin slice your tomatoes. Oh, yeah, your onions. Now, if you've never had a sausage pizza before, a real sausage pizza off the pit, you definitely got to check this out. This recipe here will feed maybe 15 people, maybe more. Yeah, now here's the magic of this recipe. This is a natural casing Italian sausage. If you look, you can find it. Maybe your butcher can get it for you. We've got 10, 12 feet, more or less.
Flies
maybe 10 pounds, all right? And you just, you coil it. Just like that. Oh, yeah. The chickens are going to love this one. Now, the technique here is you want to keep the sausage rope together, right? So use some good-sized wood skewers like this. And you just pierce from the outside, the inside, in the center. And we'll show you why we're doing this in a minute. Get it through like that. Oh, man. This is going to be good. I'm telling you. All right. Simple enough. Man. And we'll take one more skewer and go through the other side. Yeah. You get the message, right? You know how this is done. You might want to clip the skewers if they're a bit too long. That's
I love it when cooking involves needle nose pliers or clippers.
Now, we're going to take it to the grill. And what we want to do is sear it. Right? Get some good texture on it. Here we're adding some of our rub. And that's Pitmaster privilege. We're putting some habanero chipotle rub on there. Use your favorite rub. And we'll place it on our Santa Maria grill. Just like that. Oh man, it smells good. Now
and that grill looks
Santa
really
Maria
cool.
Grill is cool because you can raise and lower the grill. Great. Have total control over the heat. All right. Now, one side is seared nice. And now we're going to put the fixings on. Pretty easy, right? You know about making pizza.
Normally they would do indirect heat for this, I think.
Layer on some fresh bidet onions. Or a good sweet onion. Oh, yeah. You put what you like.
Yeah, cooking a pizza completely outside of an oven.
Throw some sliced tomatoes.
Are they going to dome it?
Oh, yeah. We got some green and
contain the heat here?
Red bell peppers. We got some mushroom. Oh, yeah. And we're going to take some of that fresh sausage out of the natural casing, add a few little pieces on top. They'll just cook just fine.
Will they?
Oh, baby. We're going to be eating good tonight, Martha. Just give us a call. We'd like to know where you're at. Now, the fresh mozzarella we're going to put on top just like a good pie, right? It's going to melt all over top. Look at that. It's good. Yep. We could fast forward this, but nah, kind of like doing this, right? Add some more shredded mozzarella cheese.
I feel like that, right, when he says that a lot. I feel like that's always like a passive-aggressive thing that he's doing at his editor. Because I'm guessing he's not the one editing this, right? So at some point in the process, the guy who he's paying to do this must send him these to talk over the edit. So he's frequently having to say, well, we could fast forward over this. And he never talks to the guy directly and says, just start fast forwarding when we're doing something for too long.
We could fast forward this, but nah, kind of like doing this, right? Add some more shredded mozzarella cheese. Whoa. And this pie is ready. Olive oil. And, of course, a little basil for you Vegematics. You gotta have the basil, right?
Putting a vegetable on there is for the vegetarians.
All them veggies on there. A pizza and a Vegematic.
Okay, so here comes the dome.
Now, we're gonna put a cover on it so we can heat evenly on the top as well. Use what cover you got. And in the miracle of time, this sausage pizza is done. Take a look at that. Lord have mercy. Let it rest for a few, and then cut it up. This is what we call finger food here around the pit. This will feed a lot of guys. I'm telling you. Good cold beer, a little bit of pizza. Alright. And of course, we do apologize for eating in front of you like this, but we call this Pitmaster privilege.
What a waste of time, effort.
So the next time you're looking for a good pizza recipe...
Sorry, this one did have some really good thumbs up in it, though.
Pitmaster, we do apologize for eating in front of you like this, but we call this Pitmaster. We do apologize for eating in front of you like this, but we call this Pitmaster privilege. Do apologize for eating in front of you like this, but we call this Pitmaster privilege. So the next time you're looking for a good pizza recipe. So the next time you're looking for a good pizza.
The wind up on that one. Really putting on display all of the principles of animation, giving us a nice long wind up to let us know the attack is coming.
So the next time you're looking for a
lot of anticipation frames there.
So the next time you're looking for a good pizza recipe for your pit, check out BarbecuePitBoys.com.
The crow is so funny.
Welcome to BarbecuePitBoys.com. Today we're grilling up a chicken cordon bleu with bacon and scallion cream gravy, and it's real easy to do.
I've never had
Today I'd like to introduce you to our custom-made Barbecue Pit Boys 14-inch Old Hickory carbon steel butchers.
Thank you, Sarah.
Play with her a little bit later. All right, now chicken cordon bleu is stuffed chicken. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to take this.
Wow, the knife is actually sharp today.
Here, and we're going to cut it in half. All right, because it's going to make it a lot easier to pound it down to about a 1/4 inch thickness. You just take your old hick, give it a slice right down the middle. Oh man, real easy to do. Now we want to get this chicken breast as thin as possible, about a 1/4 inch. This will make sure it stays nice, moist, and tender when we make this chicken cordon bleu. All right, the chicken breasts have been
disdainful handling of the meat.
Now we're going to pound them out. Get them down to an even 1/4 inch, like I said. All right.
I've never.
Oh
God, this
plastic like this.
I would be interested in trying this.
Whatever meat mallet you got. Oh yeah, pound it good. Just like that. All right, real easy to do, right? But since I got the time, let me pound out another one.
Thank you, Sylph. Now, hold on.
We're going to make 4. Let me pound out another one. But since I got the time, let me pound out another one. But since I got the time, let me pound out another one. Pound out another one. But since I got the time, let me...
Oh, shit.
This is what we're gonna pork twice, just like that. All right, real easy to do, right? But since I got the time, let me pound out another one. 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 Pound out. Let me pound out another one. Let me pound out another one. Let me pound out. Let me pound out another one.
I've returned the playback speed
now
to
we're
normal.
Gonna make 4 chicken cardamom,
which means the rest of this video will be normal.
Pounded out chicken breasts, and they're done. Now, we're going to be making up some gravy, and this is going to be a bacon and scallion cream gravy. So what we're going to do is we're going to dice up 2 slices here of bacon. Make them nice small pieces. Now, if you've never had this bacon and scallion cream gravy before, you definitely got to check this out. It not only works on chicken, it works on beef, it works on pork, it works on a piece of toast. You definitely got to check this out. All right, bacon has been diced. Now, we've heated up this pan. Add a little bit of cooking oil in there first. And we're going to take 4 tablespoons of butter.
Butter.
We're going to melt it down. Now, you probably know all about making cream gravies, right?
No.
If you've never done it before, just check this out. It's real easy to do. All right. We melted down the butter. And now we're going to add that diced bacon. We're going to brown it up. Now, you don't want to make it crispy.
You never would.
All right. Bacon is frying in the butter. Oh, baby. Now, what we want to do is be able to thicken this up, and we're going to use about a total
couple
of
bumps
3
of
tablespoons
real Colombian
of all-purpose
Coke.
flour. Or you do it your way, all right? This works real good. Just introduce about 3 tablespoons in there. Whisk it.
Now, you should have put that in there before the bacon,
nice
right?
Man, it smells good already. About 1 more tablespoon in there. Give it a good mix. Now, we're going to add about 1.5 quarts of broth, all right, or stock. And we're using a beef stock in this, all right? It's a lot richer in flavor. You could use a chicken stock, whatever you prefer. And now we're adding about 3/4 cup of heavy cream. That's why we call it bacon and scallion cream gravy. Mix it up good, and it's going to thicken up. See that?
That doesn't look thick, homie.
Good.
That's...
As it cools down a bit, it'll even get thicker. Now, pull it off the direct heat and let it simmer for a few more minutes. All right. Let's say that gravy is done. Take it off the grill, set it aside.
Yeah, maybe it'll cool off in the air here a little bit. A little sludgy for us.
All right. Let's put this chicken cordon bleu together. Now, we've got this pounded out chicken breast like I showed you. And first, we're going to hit it with a little bit of seasoning. We got some SPG.
All right, seasoning your meat, that's good.
Both sides. And now, this is what makes it cordon bleu.
Now, I've never had chicken cordon bleu. Let me know when he does something evil.
Slices to this. And here I've got some honey ham. Now, of course, you can use the cheese you want or the ham you want, but Swiss cheese in this honey ham works real good. And now we just simply fold it. Just like that. You don't need one of them toothpicks either. All right, a little bit of SPG, both sides. Grab some of that Swiss cheese. Oh, man. And some more of this honey ham. You getting hungry or what? Fold it over. And we're going to make a couple more.
So it's through the chicken wrapped around pork.
We've got this cordon bleu
ham
put together.
I've never had it. The people make it in the sandwich, right? Is there a sandwich version of this?
Now what we're going to do is put some breadcrumb on it. And first we'll take some good oil, maybe some olive oil, and lightly coat both sides. And then we're going to coat it in a mixture of panko and breadcrumb. Right? That works just right for this.
Aren't those the same thing? I mean, I guess they're different kinds of the same thing. Their breading technique is always very disappointing.
Man. Now, you could use your breadcrumb combination, whatever you like, man, but 50% panko and fine breadcrumb, oh, man. All right, this chicken cordon bleu has been breaded. Now, you want to place these on the grill, opposite the hot coals.
Indirect heat.
You know all about that. And we're going to run a temperature of about 325 degrees Fahrenheit. Whoa, man. And it's going to take about maybe a half hour. Now, while we're waiting, we're going to slice up some scallion. Now, take a look at this.
Has that gravy been off the heat this whole time?
This is what you want. Getting brown and crispy. Swiss cheese is melting inside. You can smell the ham. Now,
all right,
we're almost done.
Reheating the
Maybe
gravy.
Another 10 minutes or so. In the meantime, we're going to heat up this gravy.
Ah, interesting stuff.
All right. I'd say this chicken cordon bleu is done.
I might eat this.
Take a look at that. Yeah. It smells good. Not much more to say about this now, right? Look at that. Now here's the magic. We're gonna take this bacon and scallion cream gravy and pour it all over the top.
I mean, I do love gravy.
How much you pour on there is pitmaster privilege.
Yeah. I do love gravy.
Oh. Now, throw on some scallions. Yeah.
It's a very brown meal. It's beige.
Fresh ground black peppercorn. Well, you season it up the way you want. Now, take a look at the inside. Melted Swiss cheese on that honey ham, tender chicken topped with scallions, and bacon gravy. I'd say it's time to eat.
Oh, you're just gonna pick it up,
and as always, of course, we do apologize for eating in front of you like this, but this here is pitmaster privilege. So the next time you're looking for a recipe for your barbecue, check out barbecuepitboys.com.
I don't know if I will. I don't know. Stretch. All right. What time is it? Please unjokerify you. Yeah, let me find some sort of way to reverse jokerification. It's 4:20. Damn. That would be such a fucking cool time to smoke some weed. Dude. You know all about that. Yeah. All right, let me do some setup for you here. I said some shit about swords in the stream description. So, I think I got the urge to play a little Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. So I bought it for my PC. I've never run it on my PC. Hoagies! So maybe we'll play a little bit of that. But I think I'm gonna need to take 5 to go use the bathroom and maybe get myself a beverage. I have tomorrow off. Ooh, I just remembered I have tomorrow off. That's so good. The PC version has some quirks, says Grizzy. Oh, how quirky we talking? Is Raiden a quirked up white boy? Noticeable bug specifically with 1080p full screen. Okay. Huh. That's no good. Maybe. I mean, I have a lot of backup stuff in the pipeline here too. Yeah, I should probably test that off stream before I commit to goofing everything up. Last time we streamed it, I think it was on my Xbox. No, BB. We actually we streamed it years ago. I streamed this on the whole game on here on the channel. It's one of my. It's a fantastic game. But that was years and years ago. Oh, hang on. Let me see what else we can do then. I will test it. But let's see. Because I know I have a bunch of other stuff that I've been meaning to poke at. Go to my library, please. Thank you. New Vampire Survivor patch? That could be good. Ooh, I also have Warhammer Space Marine. But I'm thinking I want to save that. Because I think soon I might just do a whole month of Orc games. Because I got Orcs Must Die 3. I haven't installed that yet. Chivalry made a new map. Ooh, I haven't had that installed for a while. Orktober. See, Faith, I was thinking about doing it in October. For Orktober. Is Orktober already a thing? I know there's like Goblin Week or whatever it is now. Can I wait until October? That's the question. That's a long ways away. Orch. Yeah, how about we play some Vampire Survivors? Hey, Abby. Okay, yeah, we're gonna take a 5-minute break. I'm gonna give you some music to listen to. I'm gonna go get a little snack and maybe refill my water, and then we'll play some games. Be right back.
To be alone.
Okay. What game did I say we were going to play? Tempura Sushi Roll, thank you for that tier 1 sub. Welcome to the Pizza Dungeon. Vampire Survivors, that's right. There it is. There we go. Take me, and let's move me over here. Perfect. Thank you. We're gonna try to survive every Dracula. I think I turned the music off in this game. Actually, let me also do the flashy shit. Oh yeah, I had him out. I already had him off. Great. Damage numbers, yes please. Music, let's turn the music off. We'll listen to my own stuff. I want to listen to the Guilty Gear soundtrack. Okay. That music's too quiet for y'all. There you go. Is that better? Let's run Mortaccio. Kuma? How do we get Kuma? Chivos. Is it Kuma the bear from Tekken? Kill a bunch of lion heads, so we should go to the library. Wow, that's a lot of lion heads. Alright, yeah, let's go to the library. Actually, hang on, I'm gonna invest my points. Curse increases enemy speed, health quantity, and frequency by 10%. It's a thing you can just invest in now. That rules. Oh, thanks, Ash, the flower child. Let me update that. Boom. That's a good one. That's a good first time chat. Pentium Processor says, why did the vampire get suspended from school? Bad behavior. Oh god, Mortasio is kind of a scrub at the beginning. I do want to see the leveled up Lightning. What do I get for the partnership with Lightning? Oh shite! Duplicator. Okay. Garlic is an absolute killer in the library, so I'm gonna take it. She's dumping a lot of weapons on me. Let's go Fire Wand. Yeah, I think the Exard soundtrack is my favorite Guilty Gear soundtrack I've heard so far. There's like some really fun stuff on the Strive soundtrack, but I like how many good instrumental tracks there are on this one. This is one of my favorite work albums. Lightning Ring, yes. Alright, this will synergize with our fire rod, so let's take that. Yo, chat, I made a spam musubi last week. It was so good. Had it 2 days in a row. We didn't use a mold, we used the spam can. So after we got the spam out of the can, we just used some cellophane and in the can to push it down into the bottom. And yeah, that worked great. So good. Peachon? Yeah, let's get the Peachy. Actually, wait, what does the Pomarola synergize with? Oh, interesting. Meme Sure says, I've recently started putting Laoganma on my Musubis. I will try that. I did not put Laogan on mine. I think the hot sauce that I had, the spicy sauce I had, the close proximity was good old Sriracha. Okay, so this will be a synergy. I guess I'll take it. It was great though. We marinated the spam in a little bit of soy sauce, and instead of using just plain sugar, I had some maple syrup. So put a little bit of maple syrup in there. Level that bone. Damn, Francis, that sounds really good. Thanks, Abby. Let's go for the wings again too. We got. Oh wait, I didn't go for the Pichone. I took the. Okay, silly me. Meme Shark says the true pros back home have started homebrewing their own boutique spams. I would love to go on a boutique spam tour. I want to taste all of the exciting new spams that they've come up with. I did use the 25% reduced sodium spam because they had that at my grocery store. And I was like, this is still going to be primarily salt, and I'm also going to soak this in soy sauce. So I don't think I need the 100% sodium spam for this particular meal. I've heard good things about the vegan spam. It's just not widely available. Spinch. Yeah, Grizzy, I don't know how good this build's gonna do in the long run, but we'll see. Yeah, I'm gonna have a ton of AoE, but not a lot of direct damage output. Yeah, Holiday. I don't know if they're gonna up the price once it leaves early access, Ted. Oh, Big Hat Gregory's back. Hey, Big Hat. They should definitely put this game on Switch, in my humble gamer opinion. They should simply do that. Remember I made a game with zombies in it? That got re-released recently. That is the name of the game. The game is called I Made a Game with Zombies in It. It was by the guy who made Salt and Sanctuary and The Dishwasher. The Ska Studios guy. Damn, those guys will just run right through your garlic shield, huh? I'm a little bit fucked. I'm a little bit fucked in I. Is my cursor on the screen? I should move that. Thanks. We got that floor chicken. Yeah, I did make a very RNG reliant build here. RNGs and AoEs. Hit that guy. Apparently this game is pretty moddable. I was watching the Go Off Kings stream it the other day, and somebody made a mod that turns the main character, turns Gennaro into Jesse. Just swaps the pixel art out. I should dig around in the maybe I'll dig around in the Steam app files and see how easy it is. Yes, and it's the, I don't know if you've seen the picture of him holding 2 drinks at Disneyland, but it's a little pixel art version of that. Yeah, there are 3 maps you can choose in the PC release of it. Here it comes, here's the end. And yes, this is a character who's a couple weeks old at this point, but yeah, the PC update, or the PC version, gets all of the updates before the old the itch.io version, which I think they've officially started just calling a demo now. Take that stone mask, because I don't want any more weapons. I want to hold out for the Pichone. On Catholic Beast mode. Oh dear. The skeleton got blood in it. I'm fucked. I'm dead. Oh yeah, we're gonna get that government issue bonus projectile if we survive. And there's Peachy. Peach! Give me a chicken. Alright, and so there's the lion heads. These are the things that we're supposed to kill a whole bunch of to unlock Akuma. Go birds. Get away from me. Dropkick. I played some ooh fuck of this shitty freeware golf game called the Golf Club. But it was actually really fun, and it made me want to play Mario Golf. which I don't have. What? Ooh. Oh shit. Oh dang it. Oh boy. Oh boy, yeah, this is where the build's gonna fall apart, I think. But I've said that 2 or 3 times. And we have endured. Oh no. Oh dear. Oh dear me. Oh, I'm fucked. Oh, I'm proper fucked, ain't I? Oh, clutch. I can't wait until they add an evolution for the bone. A bigger bone. A whole skeleton. It should evolve into an entire skeleton. Yeah, so Onyx, when sometimes if you're off screen for too long, I believe what happens is all the gems that you didn't pick up will amalgamate into a single red gem, and then if you pick up that gem, you're getting a whole bunch of gems all at once. Oh, baby. Yeah, if you hit escape, you'll skip that animation. We'll let it rock if we get a penta chest, though. Oh, this looks bad. Oh, this looks really bad. Oh, bad positioning here. There we go. Ooh. Keep bumping right into the Medusa heads. Foolish. Foolish gamer. Fuck it, let's go. Oh, big Medusa heads are here. They're fighting for their mama. Oh shit. Oh god. Oh, I'm over. I'm over. Lord Chicken, my beloved. Yeah, this Pomerola's let me be a little reckless. Oh. Garlic sucks. I don't know why I invested in garlic. I could have done without it. Alright. I just got the duplicator and then it was just suspiciously silent for a long time. I was like, uh-oh. Yeah, now that I got the duplicator, that should level up my lightning. Okay, Thunder Loop. Evolved Lightning Ring. Projectiles strike twice. Makes a good sound, too. Alright, I'm gonna keep sitting on that chest for now, because I want to make sure that maybe I can use that to level up my one of my other things that I have right now. It's a little loud. Alright, okay, so my wand, I still have a lot of steps to go on that. I got 3 steps to go on Pichone. Alright. Let's just keep getting that. Passive regen has been helpful so far. I really like the sound of the evolved lightning. That's cool. No, no, holy shit. Fuck. I remember those being a lot easier to repel. Oh, fuck. Oh, shit. Not today, Satan! Chicken, chicken, chicken. No. No! I want those 2 birds to become 1 bird for me. So I'm a little bird partnership. Oh! Saint Psyche, thank you for stepping up. Open Pizza Hardy. Pizza Hardy. Oh, shite. Okay, we're okay. Shit. Okay, so we need 1 level in each of my birds now. And 2 levels in garlic before we get the Soul Eater.
Jesus!
Thank you for the Zandig Jesus, Big Hat Gregory. Alright, we got 2 chests here, so I'm gonna just pray to the chest gods. God, rotten luck with the chests this run. I guess, I mean, I didn't invest in luck, so I shouldn't expect good pulls. It's not quite time. I think we have 1 more level on one of our birds to go. Yeah, we need another level of white bird before we get rainbow bird. Alright, 2 chests sitting right there for when I need them. Alright, praying for that white bird right now. Come on, come on, come on. Give me that white bird. Give me that white meat. Nope. Oh fuck, I'm dead. This is it. Oh, I got fucked. Just shit. Game's struggling a little bit with these particle effects.
Your health is low. Do you have any potions or food?
I would love some of those things. Thank you. Alright, now we gotta pray for a miracle to get us back to the chest. What was that? Oh well. Phone Cats, P-Cats, thank you for the raid. The big old raid. Italian combo. Yum yum. Hey, Phone Cats, thank you for coming through. I'm seeing some garlic there, so I assume you were maybe streaming some Vampire Survivors. How'd it go? Was it fun? Was it good? Welcome to the Raiders. Hello. We just died. We literally just got... We literally just maxed out both doves. And I got ganked. So we're gonna give this another shot, I guess. Brian went okay. I shouldn't have invested in that garlic early on, though. Did I get Kuma? Oh. We got the bear. We got the bear. Oh, baby. Alright, well, let's celebrate with a bear run. I should learn Kuma in Tekken. I always forget that we're just allowed that if I wanted to, I could learn how to play Kuma, and nobody would stop me. All right, what does he do? Ooh. So he's got the same bonus as Mortaccio, just a different weapon. Lamp oil? Nope. Let's take him to the forest. Oh, I love him. Oh, yeah. So those split when they hit. Okay. They split when they hit. Oh, and then they explode! This rocks. Yes, this is great. This they don't split, but they bounce and have a chance to explode. Gotcha. Is that luck affected by, or is that chance affected by luck? Let's go for the 2 birds build again. Okay, it's a set percentage. Okay, good to know. Sweet. Ooh, that's a good bonus. Gladiator, yeah, I'm hoping we make it far enough to see that messed up particle situation. Yeah, I love a guy who looks like everything. He looks like a sloth. He looks like an owlbear. I could see hippo. Not horse. Didn't look like a horse. Oop. That's right. He's simply shaped like a friend. Yeah, apparently a hairless bear looks a lot like a dude. Listen, that was nice of her. I want cookies. Alright, survive Plant Jail 1. Doing a little bear dance. Doot, doot, doot. There's a floor chicken down there for me if I need it later. Oh, gang. I think we're gonna wrap up pretty soon. I need some snacks. I need some more snacks. I have tomorrow off work, but I have some work to do tomorrow. So gotta rest up. Uh-oh. Oh shit, I didn't mean to do that. Alright. Oh no. Yes, I will be streaming tomorrow. Probably normal time. Alright, let's go get that floor chicken. If I can remember where I left it. There it is. My beloved. 2 chickens for me. I'm a hungry, hungry hippo. What do hippos eat? They eat fruit. I mean, I've seen hippopotami eating eating watermelons, but I assume they don't have ready access to watermelons. Hang on, we have an actual answer here. Mostly herbivorous. Okay. That's cool. They eat fruit during their nightly scavenging. They're really scary animals. They're so mean and big. Yee! Oh dear, boxed myself in. It's alright, there's a floor chicken over here for me. Oh no, it's beyond the wall. It's okay. Yeah, those cherry bombs are popping. I got a triple chest situation here. Alright, well, YOLO. Trilobite Agent says, Pablo Escobar's hippos escaped his mansion after he was arrested, and now there's a bunch of feral hippos in Colombia, and the situation is getting worse. What a headline. Here's what's going on in Colombia. I know that there have been, like, war elephants in the past. Has anybody ever successfully weaponized the hippo, or are they simply too dangerous? Maybe if you could also, like, come up with a way to, like, drop a hippo deep behind enemy lines. Let's make a faster hippo. Tuba Gooding, that's what I'm thinking, is like it would absolutely need to be a situation where you like doped up the hippo, like fully tranked it, and then like airdropped it. Right? Into a situation where like your guys aren't even there. I guess I'll take this because I already have the synergies for it. Now, Tome is a synergy for me, right? That synergizes with my wand. Yes, Dorani, I am waiting to grab those chests until I have the potential to evolve a weapon. But I am dipping into them if situations get dire. Oh, scary. Oh, I'm gonna get crowd surfed here. Please, please work, please work, please work, please work, please work. Oh, I'm fucked. Oh, I'm dead. I'm okay. Scary. Break free! Run! No! Damn. I got. I've been had. That was a fun run, yeah. It's always frustrating when you don't get to any of your big fun synergies within a run. Yeah, I really like I like that new character though. He's really cool. Oh, here's a yawn. Yeah, he's a potential new fave. Really fun to play. Okay. I'm gonna send y'all over to Balt. I was just watching some silly stuff on the computer. We will be back. We'll be back tomorrow. Probably around 6 or 7-ish. For one more stream. And then, holy shit, Wednesday, I'll be streaming probably unless I'm too busy with work. And then fucking Friday, Elden Ring is out. And I'm just going to be chilling the hell out and playing Elden Ring. I'm so excited for that. I can't believe how soon it is. Thank you to the mods, especially Sylph, for hanging out today and helping out. Thanks to everybody who subbed up and came to watch the stream. Thanks to Phone Cats for the raid. Alright, time to go eat some snacks and chill out for the rest of the day. Hope everybody has a nice Sunday. Take care and see you soon.